Giffords Road to Universal Background Checks Tour. We are very excited down today in the great state of South Carolina. You all know Gabby. I will introduce her in greater detail here soon, but very honored to be joined by two very special South Carolinians. A first but not least, Sydney Clinton, who I believe is maybe a day or two away from becoming a Gamecock at the University of South Carolina. She is an activist who has worked very closely with us at Giffords, a former youth leadership fellow, a courage fellow for Giffords, and somebody who has been a very prominent young voice in the state of South Carolina, talking about these critical issues of gun safety. I am also very, very excited to welcome Mr. Jaime Harrison, candidate for United States Senate in South Carolina. Welcome, Jaime.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Peter. It's good seeing you, Sydney, and of course, my dear friend, Gabby.
Thank you.
And, Jaime, I just want to start off by saying how much of an honor and a pleasure it is to be joined by you. And I think that is true for both Gabby and me. I remember starting off as a young staffer in Capitol Hill and not knowing, what I was doing, not even knowing where the bathroom was. But there were certain people who were so exemplary in their service for their home states. And Jaime, you were a real role model and mentor to so many young staff. Working for Whip Clyburn, whipping the votes, whipping the members into shape, and really, but always providing time for sort of, lower level staffers like myself, staff assistants, and helping us sort of, learn the ropes and figure out, exactly how to do the job and to lift up this sort of task of representation as a true calling. And that is, I think, even more true for Congresswoman Giffords, who, Gabby, I know you remember getting to Congress, and we've talked about how amazing it was for you getting there and being able to work so closely with Jaime on the floor, and how much you benefited from, his tutelage and advice in those early days as you were, first becoming a member of Congress.
Yes. Yeah.
But before we get into it, Gabby, I just sort of haven't talked to you a little bit. So you're calling in from Tucson today. I understand it's a little hot. What is the temperature exactly?
109.
109. But it's a dry heat, right?
Dry heat.
Not like that sort of wet bulb humidity that y'all got in South Carolina, right?
It's so humid.
But Gabby, how are you feeling your days? We're obviously facing these quarantines. We're staying at home. We're staying safe. How are you feeling your days?
I'm so busy. A lot of Zoom call. Work. Yoga twice a week. French horn, Spanish lessons, riding my bike, walking on my treadmill, Mock G movie. It's Groundhog Day.
Yeah, same thing over and over again, right? It's obviously this is our virtual background checks tour. We would normally be, touching down in South Carolina itself and rallying South Carolina voters, in person. But this is still a wonderful way to interact with candidates and to sort of set the stage for what we know is going to be an active Congress next year when we make Mitch McConnell the minority leader instead of the majority leader, and have the opportunity to pass H.R. 8 universal background checks, to close the Charleston loophole. And Jaime, I'm so excited to have you, in this race, and as somebody, in a dead heat with Lindsey Graham, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, one of the gun lobby's lackeys there in the Senate, somebody who talks and talks and talks and talks and talks, but has not taken any action, even in the wake of the deadly Charleston shooting and the acts of gun violence that we as a nation and that South Carolinians experience each and every day. Along with this event, we are releasing a new poll of South Carolina voters that shows 8 in 10 South Carolinians supporting universal background checks. And that includes 69% of former Trump voters who support universal background checks. And that comes, 5 years now after the tragic shooting at the Mother Emanuel Church in Charleston. And Jaime, I know that was a very personal and tragic moment for you. Gabby and I obviously are no strangers to tragic acts of gun violence. But could you just start us off by talking about how that affected you as a person, and what when it comes to gun safety and this campaign, how are you responding to that tragedy?
Yeah, I really appreciate the question, Peter. And again, it's good seeing you and Gabby. It's been way too long. It's hard for me to believe that it's been 5 years since hate-filled gunmen took 9 beautiful souls away from us here in South Carolina at Mother Emanuel. And really, it feels like yesterday, and I will never forget that night. Just the phone calls and the worry. And, one of those 9 souls was my good friend, Reverend and Senator, State Senator here in South Carolina, Clementa Pinckney. This man was a brilliant public servant, and he was a God-fearing man. And there's a bill right now in the United States Senate that passed the House of Representatives in a bipartisan fashion that would close the loophole, the Charleston loophole, which let this white supremacist get a gun. And this loophole says that a background check must be automatically approved if the buyer waits more than 3 days on the check's results. And so right now, this loophole lets thousands of unscreened people purchase deadly weapons every single year. And it's simple. Dylan Roof would have been denied this gun purchase if more time was allowed for the background check to take place. And again, the bill passed the House of Representatives on a bipartisan basis, but the bill is being held up in the Senate. And it's not being held up by Mitch McConnell or anybody else, but this bill is being held up by the chairman of the Judiciary Committee. And we know who that is. The senior senator from South Carolina, a man who lost 9 lives of his constituent lives, and their families are still here right now. That person is Lindsey Graham. And he won't even let the bill come up for debate, for an up and down vote. Nobody's saying that, Lindsey, you need to support the legislation. Well, you don't have to support it if you don't believe it. But at the very least, allow the bill to be debated, discussed, and voted on. It's disrespectful. It is malpractice for the families of the victims. And so, Senate chairmanships are supposed to deliver results for the states that they represent. You would think that's what a chairman of a committee would do. But when this bill came to his desk, he started to act like the problem didn't even exist anymore. And that in and of itself is shameful. So unfortunately, this follows closely with what the Lindsey Graham playbook is these days. He talks about a problem, he'll talk a problem, and he'll talk about it, and he'll talk about it as long as it gives him a chance to get in front of a camera. But in the end of the day, folks in South Carolina want actions and not just words.
I mean, you're talking here about, gun safety policies like we discussed that have the support of vast majorities of South Carolina voters. Policies that, as we saw in Charleston, can make the difference between life and death. And you're talking about an individual, Lindsey Graham, his job is literally as chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee to deliver for his constituents. He hasn't done that, but what he has done is cash thousands of dollars in campaign contributions, checks from the gun lobby. And so, I mean, someone like me is grasping for explanations here. Why would somebody who, represents a place that went through such a horrible tragedy, where you have such widespread public support, where the facts are on our side, we know these laws will save lives, yet he does not take action. And I think you start to point to the special interests, and obviously that's something that we've got to do something about this election season. But Jaime, I want to, I think we are now up to 600,000 participants in this tour. We probably have about 100,000 people on today. Some of them, I'm sure, are meeting you for the first time. You have such an inspiring story growing up in South Carolina. Would you mind just sharing it with everybody? Telling
Yeah. Well,
I
appreciate that, Peter. Listen, I grew up in Orangeburg, South Carolina. I'm the son of a teen mom. My mom was 16 years old when she had me. She stopped school in order to take care of me, and I was raised by my grandparents, who had a 4th grade and an 8th grade education. Hardworking people. I mean, you couldn't find two harder working people in this country than my grandparents. But they also had the biggest hearts. They didn't have a whole lot of money, but they had huge hearts, and they believed that if they had $1 and you needed 50 cents, then you had it. And so they instilled in me those same types of values that really drive me to this very day. I ended up being the first in my family to go to college. I went to Yale University. I came back here after graduating from Yale, and I taught high school, 9th grade social studies at my alma mater. And then I moved to Washington, D.C. to help run a nonprofit to help other low-income kids just like me get into college. I started law school while I was there, and then joined the staff of Congressman Jim Clyburn, my hometown congressman. I became the first African-American and youngest person to be executive director of the House Democratic Caucus. And then when we won the majority back in 2006, I ran the whip operation for Mr. Clyburn and the Democrats. And that's the time I got the wonderful opportunity to meet both of you. And we were able to pass a lot of great legislation that impacted, on a positive sense, the lives of people across this country, from Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act to the Matthew Shepard, James Byrd hate crimes. And then I met my beautiful wife, convinced her to come back to South Carolina with me, where we're raising our 2 boys, a 5-year-old and a 1-year-old. And then I also became the chair of the Democratic Party here for a few years. So, when I look back at my life, I know how fortunate, how blessed I am, how I've lived the American dream. And the reason why I'm running for the U.S. Senate is to make sure that other kids, just like me, and all over the state, get the opportunity to live their American dreams. And I think that's what's really important.
Thank you so much. Gabby, did Jaime whip you into shape as a freshman?
Yeah.
In 2000?
Yeah.
Peter, I always love sitting, Gabby and I would actually sit sometimes in the back of the chamber, and we just sit there and just talk. And I had some of the most pleasant conversations. She was one of my favorite freshman members during that cycle, because, when there were tough votes, she would come and she's like, well, we can't be for this. But she was always she was always straight with us. And that's, when you're in the whip office, that's what you need. You need a member just to say, I'm either going to be with you or I'm not going to be with you. And then you can just you can decide how you need to move from there. But Gabby, I adore you. And when you were a member of Congress, it was so much fun to work with.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And I can say, Jaime, obviously, there for Gabby as a member of Congress, but I also remember, all too well on January 8th, 2011, when Gabby was shot, when a coworker of mine, Gabe Zimmerman, was murdered, one of the first phone calls I got was from you, asking, how you could be of help, how you could be of service. And that's just, so consistent with your character, somebody who cares about people, who wants to do whatever you can to help. So thank you so much for that. Sydney, I want to bring it over to you. I think, Gabby, Jamie, and I think can all agree that, young Americans have been, thrust into a position in this country, unfortunately, as leaders, because when you talk about some of the folks that we see, running this country into the ground, people like Lindsey Graham, who ignore the pleas of their constituents for safer gun laws and for other action. You've really had to step up and point your finger at at the adults in the room. As so many of your colleagues have done, call BS. But I'd love for you to sort of share a little bit of your story and tell us what brought you here today and how you got involved in the gun safety movement.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you, Peter. It's a pleasure to be here. Gabby, it's great to see you again. Jamie, it's great to see you again as well. So obviously my name is Sydney Clinton. I'm 18 years old. I originally got involved within the gun violence prevention movement February of 2018 after the Parkland shooting. That week we had a couple of events at my high school. I was a sophomore at the time, barely 16. And we had our fire alarm go off during our lunch period, which never happened. And we had, all morning been talking about what had just happened in Parkland, how the fire alarm had gone off, and sitting at lunch with some friends, and our fire alarm goes off. And, your first instinct is supposed to be to get up and go outside. And in that moment, I was like, what am I supposed to do now? The next day we had threats on social media saying someone was going to bring a firearm to the school. And so that weekend I was extremely stressed, just didn't know what I could do at 16. My parents weren't even letting me drive on the highway at this point. Like, I was just so young. I had no idea the impact that I could have. And so talking to my parents, they were like, we could go up to DC for the march. We could go to Columbia. But I wanted to see what we were doing here in Charleston. And when I found out that we weren't doing anything, I decided to start the Charleston chapter of March for Our Lives. So I got with a couple friends, we made a Twitter account and a Gmail, and we got the March for Our Lives event going. So it ended up being a phenomenal event. There were a core group of 5 of us who did the bulk of the organizing. We had over 100 amazing volunteers. We had 2,500 people show up, and it was, to this day, the best day of my life. So that summer, we kind of were talking and brainstorming, what can we do to continue to have an impact here in Charleston and here in South Carolina. So we founded the Low Country Students for Political Action. We had a number of town halls, rallies. We did a ton of educational events, voter registration drives. I mean, anything we could do to really help educate not only ourselves, but our peers. So since then, I have been to the Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Policy and Research Summer Youth Institute. I was also a Giffords Courage Fellow last year. I have been able to do organizing and activist work at the national level, at the state level, and at the local level. I am super excited to stay in South Carolina for the next few years. I'm ready to move up to Columbia this weekend. I will be majoring in sociology at the University of South Carolina. So I'm really excited to be able to keep my activist work and my organizing here in South Carolina to really continue to have an impact on my own community. Been here for about 10 years and I absolutely love it. I always thought that I was going to get out of here as soon as possible, and now I'm here and stuck here. But I'm really excited to be here with you guys this evening and to be able to talk about the things that we can do in South Carolina to continue to make some really much needed progress.
Well, we're so excited to have your voice in this discussion. Activists like you are doing so much to create a new generation of youth leaders on this gun safety issue. And when you think about the millions of young people across the country who are having their first political experience, their first political moment of consciousness around this gun safety issue, you can only imagine what the sort of decades, the decades in the future will bring in terms of an accelerating shift in our politics as young people vote in ever greater numbers and and put their feet down and say that they've had enough of the gun lobby's influence. Former Congresswoman Giffords and is obviously a strong advocate for gun safety and a co-founder of this organization. We have a brief video that details the fight that she's been in for the past several years, advocating for universal background checks and gun safety. And I'm going to play that now. Let's take a look.
What is courage? What does it look like? Courage shows truth to power and stands its ground. It's walking out. It's sitting down. It's marching towards something greater. Courage is telling your story even when it's hard to speak. Courage looks like this.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Congresswoman Gabby Giffords from Southern Arizona. You can either complain about something or you can try to fix it.
I will always extend my hand across the aisle to do what's right for the American people, to build consensus, and to get the job done.
Earlier today, a number of people were shot in Tucson, Arizona.
Arizona Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, wounded in an assassination attempt just about 2 weeks ago, is about to take the next big step along what's expected to be a long road to recovery.
It takes courage to keep going, especially when it feels impossible.
Than to witness the return of our colleague, who is the personification of courage, Congresswoman Gabby Giffords.
And to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
It's standing up and finding your voice again. Courage is speaking out. Courage is saying, we can do better. And knowing no problem is too big to fix.
Gabby, I could spend minutes, hours talking about the inspiration that you bring to me as a person and to this movement. Why don't we just cut to the chase, and would you mind sharing some inspirational words with us?
I've known the darkest of days, days of pain and uncertain recovery. But confronted by despair, I've summoned hope. Confronted by paralysis and aphasia, I respond with grit and determination. I put one foot in front of the other. I found one word and then I found another. My recovery is a daily fight, but fighting makes me stronger. Words once came easily, today I struggle to speak, but I have not lost my voice. America needs all of us to speak out, even when you have to fight to find the words. I'm also in a second fight, the fight to stop gun violence. It's also a fight forged by tragedy and pain, a fight where hard work pays off, a fight that can change lives. We are at a crossroads. We can let the shooting continue, or we can act. We can protect our families, our future. We can vote. We can be on the right side of history. Please join us in this fight. Vote, vote, vote. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Wow, Gabby, that's phenomenal. Thank you so much for that. I want to now sort of transition us into Q&A, have a little conversation here. Jaime, I'd like to start with you. We talked about the tragic and moral impact of the Charleston shooting that it had on this country and on the state of South Carolina. But can you sort of also talk about the shifting politics of the issue of gun safety? You see a new gun safety movement being born over the past couple of years. Obviously, we have Sydney here representing millions of young people in South Carolina and across the country who are raising their hand and saying, this is an important issue to me. I'm voting on this issue. You have, Black and brown Americans whose lives are, threatened in these deadly cycles of community violence. You have epidemics of gun suicide. You have guns and domestic violence. You have great coalitions of gun owners that we at Giffords have organized across the country, of medical professionals, suburban voters. So talk to me about what you see, Lindsey, what keeps Lindsey Graham up at night when we're talking about the gun safety issue?
Well, listen, when I think about it, and thank you again, Peter and Gabby, for this. When I think about this, I think it's important to be very clear about what this is and what we're trying to do. This is not about taking away people's guns. This is not about denying the Second Amendment of the Constitution. This is about promoting gun safety, making sure that the violence that has ravaged our communities does not continue and that it stops. When I think back to my life, I think about my own experiences. I've spent a lot of time over the years, skeet shooting and going, doing trap and skeet. Like so many South Carolinians, I have a deep appreciation for the skills behind marksmanship and hunting. South Carolina is a state with a proud tradition of sportsmanship. In terms of shooting, it's a place where a lot of families raise their kids with an appreciation for hunting and going outdoors, and it's just woven into the fabric and the history and the culture of the state. But at the same time, it's also a state that values responsibility, and the responsibility that comes along with safely owning and operating guns, and there's a great responsibility. And oftentimes, gun safety is seen as an issue that divides Americans, and it's not. And your polling demonstrates that. But going issue by issue in this debate, nothing could be further from the truth. We have seen that American folks, the American people, want gun safety. They want people to be responsible. And it's sad to see that Washington, D.C. and the lobby has politicized gun safety in Washington. And that's where Lindsey Graham stops progress on this year after year in the Judiciary Committee. Common sense gun safety measures are not divisive among South Carolinians. As you mentioned, 8 out of 10 in South Carolina want universal background checks, regardless of which party they belong to. And that doesn't sound like a divisive issue to me. So, we expect our leaders here in South Carolina to show up, to listen and to respond to their needs. But the person I'm running against just doesn't listen. He doesn't listen to these folks in South Carolina. He listens to people in Washington, D.C. And he only listens to those narrow special interests who have, a financial interest in maintaining the status quo. It's just not on the issue of gun safety. I mean, you got parents who are concerned when they send their kids to school. You got folks who are concerned when they go to their churches or houses of worship. You got people who are concerned when they go just to Walmart or to the grocery store. And that is not the America that I know and I love. And we have to live up to the ideals of our founders, which said respect the Second Amendment, but also do it in a responsible way. So thank you.
You know, you've got parents who are scared to send their kids to school, people who are afraid to go worship and pray in church. But then, like you said, you've got Lindsey Graham, who's had 9 opportunities in the past 5 years to support safer gun laws. He's refused to do that each and every time. He's voted against universal background checks twice as U.S. Senator, despite the fact that you've got 80% of South Carolina voters, 70% of Trump supporters who support universal background checks. Clearly, this is a kitchen table issue for South Carolina and American families right now, and something that I think voters are ready to make a change on. Speaking of change, Sydney, you've been a big part of lifting that change up and creating a youth movement. But what are some of the changes that you've seen, you know, in the short time that you've been involved in the gun safety issue? And what's the progress that we've made?
So legislation-wise, I'll be honest, I've seen nothing change. Obviously, we had a couple bills pass through the House, and that was awesome progress. But like we've mentioned before, we can't get it through the Senate, and it's just sitting there. And so it's doing no good if, you know, our leaders in the Senate aren't willing to really take a stand on this issue. In South Carolina in particular, we have been trying to get the Charleston loophole bill to close the Charleston loophole passed for the last 5 years and had no success, both on the Senate side and on the House side. I think though among, you know, communities, especially here in North Charleston, and amongst some of the other communities that I know organizers in, the conversation around gun violence is what's really been changing the most. Obviously, we talk about the mass shootings that have plagued cities all over this country, but we've really started to take into account the suicides and the community violence that are impacting people every single day that don't reach the news. I was in Kansas City last summer and staying at a hotel. So I was there for about 3 weeks, and every day I was sitting there and the news was on, and at least every single day there were new shootings that had happened in the Kansas City area. And it was just the local news, and they were so cavalier about, you know, these victims who a lot of the times were children and, you know, are at home or asleep in their beds or playing in their yards, who are victims of this community violence. And there are so many things that we can do both at the local and the state level to really make an impact. We can invest in community violence intervention programs. We can give organizations that are doing great work, like Baltimore Ceasefire, you know, the resources that they need in order to truly be successful. I think within the gun violence prevention community, we have really made an effort to shift the narrative around gun violence and make sure that we are talking about it as holistically as possible, particularly when it comes to gun safety. The Be Smart program is great, that may target, you know, parents, and we ask our kids, or, you know, when they go over to a friend's house, like, okay, do you have any food allergies or anything that we need to be aware of? We don't think to ask about a firearm. And there are so many, you know, cases where, you know, kids find a firearm, and sure, you can tell a child not to play with something, but I mean, you can't expect them to truly grasp the enormity of how important it is. And so, you know, safe gun ownership and proper storage are just so critical. And I think really talking about, you know, that kind of realm of the gun violence prevention movement is a very easy thing to do to make people feel like they can have some kind of tangible change within the movement.
Yeah, no, it's amazing when you think of the progress that we've made in a short period of time, right? Because you know, this is a tough issue to work on, and you know, you're working on something day in and day out where you've got, 100 people who die every year, 33, 34 Americans who are murdered, nearly 40,000 Americans who die from gun violence every year. And it's easy to get cynical. It's easy to lose hope. And to be quite honest with you, that's what the other side wants. That's what the NRA and Lindsey Graham want. They want us to believe that this is a problem that does not have a solution, that it is like a hurricane or a wildfire or earthquake, naturally occurring disasters that, blame social media, video games, bad parenting, poverty, everything but the one thing that they can actually do to solve the problem. But, they time and time again refuse. And I was just sort of looking at my notes here, and you have Lindsey Graham, somebody who has recently accepted over $50,000 from the NRA. And I think that is a theme here, popular support for a policy, opposition to that policy from an elected official like Lindsey Graham. Dig a little deeper. There are financial relationships to special interests that could explain a lot of that opposition. So Gabby, speaking of these tragedies, you have, you say cities names like Tucson, Charleston, El Paso, Dayton, and people know that these aren't just like lists of cities. These are references to horrific mass shootings. We're closing in at the beginning of next year on the 10th anniversary of the Tucson shooting. Yet you are not deterred. You continue to fight each and every day. What have you learned from your experiences over the last 9 years?
To be grateful for friends and family, and to live every day to the fullest.
I'm grateful for you. And I know you do live every day to the fullest, because like every time I check Instagram, I feel like you're like on a 50-mile bike ride and parachuting out of airplanes, doing all that sort of fun stuff. We're gonna, I want to bring the audience in here, have everybody sort of have a chance to ask questions. For those of you on Twitter, use the hashtag #GunSafetyCongress. If you're on YouTube or on Facebook, throw your comments and questions just into the comment section, and we'll do our best to get to a couple. And as you throw your questions in there, we made a short video about the road to universal background checks, and I'm going to play that right now.
For the first time since the Clinton administration, the House of Representatives passes significant gun legislation.
This bill would basically require background checks for almost every gun sale or gun transfer in America.
Enough is enough. And our first order of business in the Senate should be to pass the House Background Checks Act.
As long as I'm the majority leader of the Senate, none of that stuff is going anywhere. I am indeed the Grim Reaper.
Over 90% of Americans support expanding background checks.
By closing these loopholes, we will make our communities safer.
We have a mission. We have an obligation. It is the right thing to do to save lives.
The Senate is a firewall for the NRA.
And change must come to Washington.
There are now more activists on the side of gun safety than on the side of the NRA.
Now is the time to come together. Be courageous. The nation's counting on you.
Jamie, in that video, we saw the courage and the voice of your late friend, John Lewis. He will be remembered for so much in history, something that I will always be grateful to him for, and something that I think, he doesn't sort of get as much credit for because of the sort of, monumental nature of his other achievements, is how critical he's been to the gun safety movement. In the aftermath of the Pulse shooting in Orlando in 2016, he led the first ever House of Representatives sit-in on the issue of gun safety. And I would just love to turn it over to you to tell us about, talk to us about John Lewis's example, what he's meant to your career, and how we can all do better by following his example on the issue of gun violence prevention.
Yeah, well, thank you for that, Peter. Listen, John Lewis was a special man, and he was a friend and a mentor. When you think back on John Lewis, and I didn't tell you my special relationship with him, but I think back on John Lewis often, and I think about what he went through. This is a man that had been beaten, had been bloodied, had been discriminated against, had dogs sicked on him, but probably was one of the most gentle spirits that has ever walked the face of this planet. There was not a mean or angry bone in John Lewis's body. I was very, very fortunate to spend a lot of time and work with Mr. Lewis because he was our senior chief deputy whip. And my office in the U.S. Capitol, I shared a wall with John Lewis. The left wall was with his office, where his hideaway. And I would often go into his office, which was like a living museum in and of itself. I talked to Mr. Lewis probably about 2 months ago, 2.5 months ago, shortly after the diagnosis. And I called him up on the cell phone one day. And I said, Mr. Lewis, this is Jaime Harrison. He said, hey, brother, how are you? And he said, how's everything in South Carolina? I said, things are going well, Mr. Lewis. I'm doing what you taught me. We're stirring up some good trouble here in South Carolina. And he just laughed. And he said, young brother, I'm so proud of you. We often call the Congressional Black Caucus the conscience of the Congress. But it was John Lewis who was the soul of the Congress. And I don't know what happens because that soul is now gone. He is leaving big shoes for a lot of folks to fill. I'm going to do my very, very, very best to try to live my life and to run this campaign and to be a public servant in the mold of the icon, John Lewis.
I think about that every day, and you are, and thank you. We have our first question now from the audience. This one goes to you, Sydney, from Carlos, who writes, Sydney, I'm also a student and have been so inspired by March for Our Lives and other student activists fighting for gun safety. However, I'm new to activism and I'm not sure where to start if I want to get more involved. What is your advice for people like me?
Well, thank you, Carlos, for your question. It's one that I get kind of a lot. Entering this realm of politics and activism and organizing is very intimidating. And to be honest, it's intimidating no matter how long you've been involved. I really think the best way, though, to start getting involved is checking out whatever is going on in your community. There are loads of amazing organizations all over the country that are doing really, really great work in communities. We've got a handful here in Charleston, and even more in South Carolina in general, that are constantly doing work. It's very easy to kind of get sidetracked by the big names. Obviously, Giffords is one of those, but March for Our Lives and Moms Demand Action, and those big name organizations that have chapters all over the country and are on the news all the time. But the hard work happens behind the scenes and with these small local organizations. The biggest thing I think in getting involved is recognizing that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Find out what happens in your community and find out the groups that, are already in place, because it's very easy to think, oh, I want to do X, Y, and Z. Let me just start my own group. But with that, it comes, the resources, the people, the manpower, and why not bring your tools and expertise and the things that you can do to an organization that's already in place, where all you're doing is enhancing and adding to that holistic experience. Definitely reach out to folks. Don't be afraid to, DM people on Twitter, put out a thing on Facebook like, hey, this is who I am. This is what I'm good at. What can I do? Who can I help? And people love that. I mean, anytime anyone ever reaches out to me, I try to jump on it as fast as possible because, we always need people, and we always need new, fresh faces to really continue to add to the groups and the organizations. Check out things that are going on in your school, whether you're in high school or in college. There are loads of clubs and groups that you can be involved in. And the biggest thing is find something that you're passionate about, even if it's not March for Our Lives or gun violence prevention. There are organizations and ways to get involved and make a positive change in your community in any kind of way. So I definitely just urge you to start reaching out to people. Don't be afraid to be pushy. I know a lot of times it's intimidating, especially when you're working with some of these organizations that are mainly adults. But go in there and, stand strong and do what you need to do.
Thank you. And I would open our doors at Giffords to all of you. We're not just, it's not just Gabby and Peter and like a website and, a post office box. We're, an organization of over 2 million supporters across the country, coalitions of students, gun owners, veterans, healthcare workers, and more. Know your own agency, know your power, speak out. You have the ability to change things. Jamie, yes. You've been talking about gun safety with folks all around South Carolina, and I can only imagine what a rich experience that's been. I'm sure you've heard a diverse range of personal stories through those conversations. And we have a question from Hannah, who says, Jamie, I am a Democrat, but all my family members are Republicans, and we live in a deeply conservative community where people are gun owners. For that reason, I'm hesitant to talk about gun safety policies like universal background checks with my family or neighbors. What has been your experience with communities like mine? And what's a good entry point into a conversation like that?
Yeah. Again, the thing about South Carolina, it's a very special place. It's a very unique place, a place where we have a lot of gun owners, but also a place where folks understand the responsibility that comes along with gun ownership. And what we should emphasize to folks is that we just want people to be safe when they own guns. We want to make sure that people understand the huge responsibility that comes along with it. And we want everyone to feel as though that they can safely go to their places of worship, that they can go to their schools, that they can just go shopping and do it with the peace that they as individuals and their family members will be taken care of. And I think that's the way to go about it. Many times folks get caught up into these positions, and all they hear is the position, but they don't look underneath and see the underlying interest. I often tell this story about an orange, and you have two kids that are fiercely fighting over an orange in the kitchen. And the mom, exacerbated, so tired of hearing the arguments about this orange, she comes in, she takes the orange, she cuts it in half, gives it to both kids, marches out, feeling as though she accomplished something. But in essence, if she would turn back to look, neither of the kids are happy, partly because she didn't ask what the underlying interests are. One kid wanted the orange juice, and the other kid wanted the orange rind to make an icing. And so what we got to do on these very complex and sometimes very heated issues is look past the positions that we think we know and figure out what are folks' underlying interests. What are the things that they really, really do care about? And then start from there in order to find some common ground and common solution. And so there's no need to fight. Lord knows we got so many other things to fight about. Let's find ways that we can make progress so that folks can safely own guns, and at the same time, folks can feel safe in their homes, in their schools, in their places of worship.
Yeah, and endorsing you, we are an organization of gun owners. Gabby is, of course, a survivor of gun violence, but she is also a gun owner. And I believe sitting a few feet away right now from a gigantic gun safe. And we've got coalitions of gun owners organized in states across the country. And at the end of the day, you're right. People just want to feel safe. They want to be able to send their kids to school, not worried that they're going to get that text message saying, there's an active shooter, mom and dad, I love you.
Yep.
And what it's come to as a country here, because of the inaction of politicians like Lindsey Graham, is we're literally asking kids to stand up to mass shooters, to run, fight, hide, because our elected officials refuse to stand up to the gun lobby. And why? Because of political contributions. And that's something that I think working together, we're going to be able to change. We have one last question right now. Gabby, it goes to you, from Olivia. And she writes, Gabby, I've been so moved by your story and your strength. Even now, with all the difficulties that our country is facing, you seem so hopeful and determined. How do you continue to keep such a positive outlook?
Oh, friends and family, and to live every day to the fullest.
Yeah, you got to keep on doing that. That's right. Live every day to the fullest. I know over the next, Jimmy, I think you're going to correct me here. Was it 44 days?
Yes.
44 days?
Oh, wait, well, we got 80 something days, right?
Oh, sorry. I cut that in half. 84 days.
Yeah, 84 days.
Okay, yeah, that's right.
I wish it was 44.
In any case, so it's time to start wrapping up here. Jamie, let's talk a little bit about your race. You are in a dead heat with Lindsey Graham, who's been in the Senate for what, 25 years? He's been in Congress for 25 years?
He's been in Washington for almost 25 years, about 17 in the Senate and the rest in the House.
And you started behind. Today, in poll after poll, we see you statistically tied with Lindsey Graham.
The latest poll, the Quinnipiac poll, had us tied at 44-44.
Well, that is a huge opportunity to elect somebody of your character and caliber to the U.S. Senate, but also, if we're able to elect you to the U.S. Senate, that doesn't just, put an end to Mitch McConnell's reign as majority leader. It also means that we get to do really meaningful things for people's lives. We get to pass universal background checks. We get to close the Charleston loophole. And when we're able to do these things, that means we're going to have real meaningful impacts, life-saving impacts on people's lives. So what I want to do for a second is make a pitch for your campaign, Jamie, and then turn it over to you to close us out.
Sounds good.
So so we know we've got 84, not 44 days left to go. What is your website?
It's JaimeHarrison.com.
That is
spelled Jaime, JaimeHarrison.com.
So y'all, you need to go to JaimeHarrison.com. I'm going to do this right now. Donate your money, volunteer your time, and commit. Make a plan to vote. And once you're done doing all that, make sure all of your friends and your family do the same thing. I know, Sydney, you're fully on board and have been working your heart out for Jamie. But Jamie, tell us, what can we do as Americans and as South Carolinians to help you beat Lindsey Graham, take back the Senate, pass universal background checks, and close the Charleston loophole?
Well, thank you, Peter, and I want to thank you and Gabby for your longtime friendship and your vision, and your fighting on the side of right. As I said from the very start of this campaign, this is not about Democrats versus Republicans or progressives versus conservatives. It's about doing what is right versus what is wrong. And you all have always been champions of the right, and I so appreciate and value your friendship and your leadership right now, particularly on this issue. And Sydney, you are just absolutely amazing, and you are a joy, and you are the model of what it means to be a young public servant right now. So thank you for your commitment and standing up and speaking out, and as Congressman Lewis said, getting into good trouble. So thank you for doing that. And I want to thank everybody for joining online tonight and welcoming me on today and doing all the great work to support common sense gun safety across the country. Sometimes the gun violence problems facing us in the country, they seem almost too big of a problem to solve. And Peter and Gabby, I know you probably feel that sometimes. And you get politicians like Lindsey Graham who make even the most incremental progress feel like it's insurmountable and impossible sometimes. And so the odds may feel long, but I know what it means to overcome those odds. My life is a testament of overcoming long odds. And so, I'm running for the seat right now to make sure that, kids understand that they can overcome long odds and succeed and feel safe and live their American dreams. And that's what's important. I have hope that we can solve this problem. And I have hope that we can do it together. And how we do it is we ignore the special interests and we find common ground. And what are those underlying interests that we all have to solve the problem, to get it done? But we need new leadership in Washington, D.C. We need a type of people who listen to their constituents and deliver results. I want to end my remarks with giving everybody a story of hope, something that keeps me going each and every day. Because I believe in order to solve the issue of gun violence in South Carolina, we got to first bring hope back to the people of this great nation and to the state of South Carolina. When I worked for Mr. Clyburn in the whip's office, we used to have, as you, Peter and Gabby remember, used to have long, late nights sometimes.
Yeah.
Well, there was one night, well past midnight, I was sitting in my office, and it was so late that a member of the custodial staff was coming and she was cleaning up. And at that time, my office was on the 3rd floor of the U.S. Capitol. I could look out my window straight down the mall. And so it was a middle-aged African-American woman. She's vacuuming, she's wiping things down. And she stood in my doorway and I saw her and I said, "Ma'am, if you need to come in, I'll leave. You're my boss." And she smiled at me and she said, "I come and clean your office every night. You have a nice office." And I said, "Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate it." She said, "Now, are you from South Carolina?" I said, "Yes, ma'am, I am." She said, "Are you from Orangeburg?" I said, "Yes, I am from Orangeburg." And then she walked over to my wall and she looked at my pictures and she said, "I love looking at your pictures. Is this a picture of your family?" I said, "Yes, ma'am, that's my family." She said, "Is this your mother?" "Yes, that's my mom." "Is your mom's name Patricia Harrison?" "Yes, that is my mom." And she stopped in the middle of the room and she started shaking. She put her hand up to her mouth and she said, "Oh my God, I know your mother. I went to high school with your mom. I remember when your mom had to stop school in order to have you." And tears start flowing from her face and I get all teary-eyed. And then she came up and she hugged me and she said, "I would have never thought that Patricia Harrison's son would be right here. You give me hope." And my friends, that is what this election's all about. It's not about me or Lindsey Graham. It's not about Donald Trump or Joe Biden. It's about the millions of people across this country in facing gun violence and facing all of the issues of poverty and healthcare. And all they see is hatred and bigotry and discrimination. Those folks have given up all sense of hope. But we got to follow what Dr. King told us in his letter from a Birmingham jail. He said, "We will repent in this generation, not merely for the hateful words and actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence of the good people." Like Gabby started this session off tonight, we all have to stand up. We all have to speak out, and we have to give people hope again. And that's what our campaign is about here in South Carolina. That is the work that you all do each and every day, is giving people hope that things will get better, because I know it will. The American people in this election are going to stand up and speak up in one unified voice that enough is enough, and we're bringing hope back to the nation. So thank you all for supporting me, and thank you for fighting for hope.
Thank you for fighting. Gabby, Jamie, Sydney, you give me hope. Together, we're going to do big things. Thank you to everybody who's tuned in today. It's an honor to be able to spend a little bit of time with you this evening. and look forward to continuing on the road to universal background checks. Y'all have a good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.